Hi, I'm Andy Ellis. I'm the host of this show and a potential Green Party candidate for governor of Maryland in 2026. I'm using this show to highlight interesting people and ideas that help me and you to understand what is happening and what is possible. You can learn more about the campaign by going to gogreen2026.com. Guests on this show do not necessarily support my campaign or the Green Party. They've agreed to come on to discuss ideas and issues. And of course, click the subscribe button on YouTube so you can keep up to date with this podcast. Good evening. It is Friday, October 18th, and here in Maryland, early voting starts next week and Election Day is around the corner. As we continue this season of the podcast, focus on Green Party members running for down ballot office, tonight we turn to a judicial race, which is a first for the podcast. Claudia Barber is running for the Circuit Court Judge in Anne Arundel County. Claudia has been a member of the Maryland Bar for 35 years, and she served as an administrative law judge in Washington, D.C. for over a decade. She's been a lifetime member of the National Association of Women Judges, and she is also the author of a 2024 book entitled How to Survive Protracted Civil Litigation. In addition to her accomplished career in law, she is also a dedicated activist for justice and civil rights. She's the 2024 recipient of the Lawyer of Distinction Award, the 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Drum Major for Justice Award, and the Sojourner Truth Award, and in 2016, the Anne Arundel County NAACP President's Award. I'm excited to bring Claudia Barber on the show.
Hello, glad to be here. Very much glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here, Claudia. I'm excited to talk about some of the legal work, get into what a judge does in Maryland, and talk a little bit about the book and some of your other activism work. I'm really excited to get a chance to talk to you tonight. Are you ready to just dive into it?
I'm ready.
All right, let's go ahead. Claudia, how did you get involved in politics?
Well, my very first time I decided to file a certificate of candidacy was back in 2016. And at that time, the circuit court for Anne Arundel County was an all-white judiciary. And there were many opportunities that people of color from all races were applying for judgeships, and they were not being shortlisted. So because the Maryland Constitution and law allows for an open process when it comes to circuit court judges and their election, I took advantage of that opportunity, filed a certificate of candidacy, and that was really my first real experience with politics. I mean, I often, stayed on top of political issues, but this was the first time actually jumping into a specific race and declaring a candidacy.
Okay, so that was 2016. And so why are you running for judge this time in 2024?
Well, in 2016, I ran and won the primary. And I was the first African-American female to advance to the general election ballot in 2016. However, I lost the general election by 4 percentage points. So this is an opportunity for me to try again and to not be swayed by a missing the mark or missing the number of votes in 2016. I'm going to try again.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, 4%. That is close, and that is worth a second shot at it. And I know we'll get into how your campaign is going in a little bit. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about what does a circuit court judge do in Maryland and do in Anne Arundel County?
Well, there are many circuits in the entire state of Maryland. Anne Arundel County is the 5th circuit. And in this particular year, there are 31 candidates running for 28 circuit court judgeships in 12 counties this fall. And so my opportunity to run for Anne Arundel County circuit court is one in which circuit court judges will be on the ballot. And yes, it is a down ballot, but it's an important race because out of all the offices that are out there on the ballot, this is the only one in which judges serve for 15-year terms or until they reach 70. So that's how significant this is. You know, if you run for president, that's for 4 years. And if you run for even, you know, Congress or Senate or House of Delegates or governor, most of the time those offices are 4 years. But this is a situation where candidates can run for a 15-year term.
Excellent. And so how does the judicial branch run in Maryland? How does it, you know, what are the different levels of the court?
Well, that's a significant question because it's a lot to unpack. Because what people are going to see on their ballots in this particular election, you're going to see some judges in which you vote yes or no. And those are the appellate judges. Then you will see in the circuit court races, if circuit court judges are out there, you're going to see them in a different category where you can vote for one or vote for two or vote for up to two, or even they will also have a write-in. Now, the write-in option is available on the general election ballot, but the slots for the circuit court are based on the number of slots that are open, based on the judicial vacancies and the number of appointments that, let's say, a governor has made in the judiciary. And sometimes their vacancies also, or there might be a situation where someone is running again because their 15-year term is up. So they would be on the ballot too. But in this particular scenario, you have district court judges, which are small claims court judges, landlord tenant judges, and judges that handle largely criminal misdemeanors and very few felonies, but most of the felonies are handled in circuit court. Now, in circuit, now let me back up. The district court judges are not elected. They're not elected at all. They are appointed, you know, they go through a judicial nominating commission process. They get Senate confirmation. They are appointed by the governor, and then they go through a Senate confirmation. And there may be a reappointment process in 10 years, but you will never see their names on a ballot to vote for them. So that's the district court. And then you go to the next level, which is the circuit court. The circuit court is the court of general jurisdiction. It is the only court in the state that handles jury trials. Mm-hmm. And in addition to jury trials, you have so many things that the circuit court covers: name changes, adoption. They handle family law, contested divorces, uncontested divorces, child custody matters. They handle most of the time the major felonies that on the criminal side. And they also handle corporate matters. Let's say there's a church dispute or a corporation, or there's a minority stakeholder a lawsuit, a derivative shareholder suit, all of those, a corporate takeover suit, undue influence cases that are appealed from the orphans court. Many of the appeals from the orphans court go to the circuit court. So that's why it's called the court of general jurisdiction. It also covers breach of contract cases. It covers appeals from the Workers' Compensation Commission. So it covers even your average interference, negligence cases, motor vehicle, auto accident cases. And it also I mean, I might be leaving some areas out, but it is the Court of General Jurisdiction. It also handles declaratory judgment actions. It also handles petition for judicial review of administrative agency decisions. And it also handles cases involving, let's say, insurance disputes. It handles homeowners association disputes. It handles your average civil case involving parties, interference with contract relations, tortious interference with contract, negligence cases, all tort claims. You know, if you're praying for a jury trial, they would all be in the circuit court.
Gotcha. So district court handles traffic stuff and things like that.
Sure, traffic violations, yes.
Misdemeanors. Circuit court handles the bulk of, you know, of everything you mentioned there. And then what are the levels of the court above that? What
Above
is the
that,
appeals process?
Yes, you have an opportunity to appeal to the court of what used to be the Court of Special Appeals. That's the intermediate level appellate court. It is now called the Appellate Court of Maryland. Then after that, there is the Supreme Court of Maryland, which is the highest court in the state of Maryland. It used to be called the Court of Appeals of Maryland, and legislative name change came through about 2 years ago. And so the courts have embraced new names, and all the judges on the high court are called justices.
Gotcha.
So those are the levels of, and a quick civics lesson on the judiciary. Now, the Supreme Court of Maryland judges, once they are appointed, they must stand for what's called a retention election. And in the retention election, they will appear on your ballot as a yes or no vote. So it's not, you know, you can vote up to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. They will always be a yes or no. Do you want them in office? Do you not want them in office? And they run statewide, so they're not on the ballot for one specific jurisdiction. Same thing with the Intermediate Appellate Court, the Appellate Court of Maryland. If they were appointed by the governor, they must stand to run in a retention election, voting yes or no. Then again, the circuit court is the unique court where it's an open process, and once the governor makes the appointment, all of those persons appointed must stand to run for a 15-year term. And lawyers may file a certificate of candidacy and also be a part of that process.
Gotcha. So district court judges, not elected. Everybody else has some interaction with the electorate.
Exactly.
Excellent. So how are the Maryland courts different from the federal courts?
Well, federal courts, jurisdiction-wise, handles generally federal law matters. They also handle diversity of jurisdiction matters up to a certain amount of money. And most of the time, if you have a federal question, that the proper jurisdiction is federal court. So they can handle, you know, your Title VII Civil Rights Act cases, and also handle federal criminal matters like bankruptcy. They handle bankruptcy. There's a bankruptcy court, but they also, and bankruptcy courts are only federal courts. They're not state courts at all. Federal district court, however, has also jurisdiction over, let's say, matters involving not just diversity of jurisdiction. They have magistrate judges handling, let's say, U.S. Park Police criminal citations or tickets that are issued. But the other part of the federal courts, sometimes they have concurrent jurisdiction. Some years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision called Yellow Freight Systems versus Donnelly. And in that particular case, people were under the impression that federal courts had exclusive jurisdiction only of all federal cases falling under federal law. However, the Supreme Court specifically stated in that decision that the federal courts have concurrent jurisdiction, that because state courts are courts of general jurisdiction, you could file, let's say, a Title VII employment discrimination case in state court and not just federal court. So federal court, they clarified and interpreted that, federal employment discrimination cases can also be heard in state court, and the state court they would go to would be the circuit court.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah. It seems like that interplay between the courts is really important, like both within the state and between the state and the federal. And, it feels like the circuit court is kind of in the middle of that web, and one of the most important, really doing much of the core legal work of what people think about is, what the courts are doing here in Maryland. I think that point about jury trials, for example, only occurring in circuit court is a really good clarification for folks.
Well, circuit court judges really are umpires. They marshal the evidence and weigh the credibility of the witnesses. They weigh the evidence and they call the balls and strikes. If somebody raises an objection, they decide if it's overruled or sustained. So they really play an important role in the groundwork of trials. They have a very active docket when it comes to trying cases.
Yeah, and I imagine that docket can be a real challenge at times for the courts to handle. And I guess that leads me to my next question is, what are some of the challenges that the circuit courts face in Maryland?
Well, circuit courts face a situation, just as you said. There are literally difficult cases for judges to try. For example, especially if it's a police misconduct case, especially the squeegee kid that fatally shot someone, that went after a squeegee kid with a bat. That was a controversial case. A lot of issues arose as to whether or not the person should be tried as an adult or if it should remain in juvenile court. And having, a good criminal defense attorney was significant, because I believe he kept that case, he tried to keep that case in juvenile court, as opposed to keep causing it for the person to be tried as an adult. And when you get high profile cases, you are bound to likely be part of the spotlight, part of the news, part of the story. And so judges could get cases that are that challenge ballot questions. So especially circuit court judges. Circuit court judges could get cases that address, let's say, an election machine breaking down in the middle of the election, and then you don't know the integrity of that fix. If the machine comes back up, did it delete all the ballots that were behind them and cause the numbers to be off? Or do you have absolute proof that you kept all the ballots that were made before the machine broke down? And, there's a question over an election too close to call. If somebody asked that the ballots be counted all over again, that decision often comes to the court after the elections are over, and challenges to the ballot just happen. Let's say if a poll closed early or didn't get in, there's an hour worth of people in line and the polls closed at 8 o'clock, and somebody cutting the voters off, as they did in Florida at one point in time. The courts have to decide important ballot questions and important election integrity issues. So it's really an important task.
And this is especially the case in Anne Arundel County, where the State Board of Elections and the state capitol is located. So I think all of those ballot question challenges, almost all of that election stuff, comes through the Anne Arundel County Circuit Court, right?
It did come through it, and then then the Supreme Court, with that last ballot question involving Harbor Place in Baltimore City, even though it was tried in the Circuit Court for Anne Arundel County, it was appealed to the Supreme Court of Maryland, and they decided to keep the ballot question as is. And so the jurisdiction is critically important. I know in one of those cases, the argument was made that the jurisdiction was not correct because the ballot question arose in Baltimore City, not in Anne Arundel County. Why would you just file the case in Anne Arundel County when the issue is strictly a Baltimore issue? So, questions arise like that, and it's up to the circuit court judge to decide that case.
Yeah, and I think in one of the cases, it was challenging an act of the Baltimore City Board of Elections. So that one of those, I think, started in Baltimore City, and then this one was challenging the State Board of Election for the presentation of the ballot. Is that right?
Right. Yes.
And so I know that so those election cases, and I think Anne Arundel County is the place that hears anything that is about statewide elections, right?
So it's an important jurisdiction, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they often get challenges from the State House or Maryland legislator related issues.
So basically, any State House issue, any State Board of Elections issue, or any government office that is located in Annapolis, those things end up likely in your circuit court.
Often in circuit court for Anne Arundel County.
Got you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, and thank you so much for walking folks through the judicial part of the ballot. I think it's a part of the ballot that many people don't pay that much attention to, and especially don't know that much about. And I thought your explanation of the different levels of court, how it works, and how the judges get elected was really helpful. And I hope voters will pay attention to that before they just skip over that part of their ballot.
Right. That's, it's amazing when you look at voter data results, you would be surprised at how many times people skip down ballot races.
Yep.
They just, I don't know this. I don't know what this is about. Why is it here? And why is some yes, no, and some not yes, no? So I'm going to skip this stuff. And they skip the ballot questions too.
Yep. I mean, we are working on this ballot question in Baltimore City right now that would shrink the size of the city council. And, the 98% of ballot questions in Baltimore City have passed since 1999. And part of it is because people either don't vote for it or just vote yes on it. And I think oftentimes the judges are either vote yes on this person or it is pick two and there are only two. And so I think it's really interesting that you were in a contested judicial election. 5 people in your race, is that right?
It's 4 going for 2 seats.
4 going for 2 seats.
Yes.
Got you. And people get to vote for 2?
People get to vote for up to 2. So you can put down, you can check 1 box, or you can check 2 boxes. Got
you. Yeah. And those, I think so many people in Maryland, especially when things are not close and, we're so used to general elections, especially presidential elections and Senate elections and things like that are not close. I think there's a lot of people this year that are going to vote top of the ticket and, whatever click, click, click on the rest of it. And I think it's really good that you're out here telling people about how this works, that there's other races and that they matter and that there's important things at stake in them.
There are, as you know, as many people are aware in the U.S. Senate race, that nationwide. That is an important race, as are the congressional races, because the power of who controls the House, who controls the Senate, that's what's at stake.
Yep. And I think that has gotten more people paying attention to the general election this year in Maryland, which I think is a good thing. Having any close race in a presidential year, especially when we're so used to being, so decidedly one way or another in the presidential race, having a close race on the ballot across the state, having a judicial race in Anne Arundel County, having a ballot question series of races in Baltimore City. All of that gets voters engaged in talking about stuff that they don't normally talk about. And I think that's a net positive.
And that is a good thing all the way around. Having engaged voters, having them pay attention to the process and understanding how their vote counts.
Yep, exactly. And, I think that seeing it, there's times where I lose hope about the state of democracy, and especially in places like Baltimore City, where we're a very one-party town and it feels like everything is preordained. But seeing the amount of activity around some of these ballot questions this year is really inspiring. Seeing the kind of activity around your race, where we know people are campaigning. People are actively campaigning in a judicial race, which is not something that always happens. And it's good to see you're out there. And, you've got some good endorsements. We'll talk about that in a second. But I want to go back to this thing that you talked about the composition of the Anne Arundel County Court in 2016. So I know that you mentioned that the court was an all-white court in 2016, right?
Yes.
And you have put a lot of effort, in addition to the race that you ran for that position, but in work beyond that, into challenging and changing the composition of that court. So I'd love to hear a little bit about some of that from 2016 forward, because I know you did a lot of work on that.
Yes. Actually, several civil rights organizations got together, and after I lost the election in 2016, they began having protests at the courthouse at 8 Church Circle. And at that time, Governor Hogan was in office, and we basically brought squarely to his attention that this is just a wrong that could not be accepted. And so in 2018, I believe it is, if it's not 2017, he was the first governor to appoint an African-American female to the circuit court for Anne Arundel County in the 368-year history of the court. So our Ketanji Brown Jackson in this county is Elizabeth Morris. She was the first African-American female to be appointed. And, the interesting thing about how the court got there again is the fact that the Judicial Nominating Commission process is one in which people were bypassed and people were overlooked. And so we had to bring awareness of that. And I'm glad we did, because the composition of the court should continue to be one in which people are not in the community saying that court's not fair. I can't get a fair trial in that court. That's, no different than the Emmett Till verdict. That's no different than the Leroy Perry verdict, and so on. So you have that situation where the court system it does not the community doesn't look favorable on the court system and how it administers justice. So the first African-American male on the court, Judge Clayton Green, who's now retired, he was the first years ago. And then he was elevated to the Court of Appeals of Maryland at that time. He just retired a few years ago. And actually, I met him on the campaign trail again this year. But to the extent that he was only the first African-American male, there are no African-American males on there now. There are no Hispanics. There are no Indian Americans on there. It's just two African-American females at this point. But as I said before, no Hispanics whatsoever, no Asian Americans whatsoever. So it's looking at that and saying, how do you think these people feel? Do they feel, well represented in that particular scenario?
Yeah. And do they feel like the justice is just and that the judge is fair, and
Right,
and
right,
and I think, and Anne Arundel County I don't know the demographics of it, but an all-white judiciary does not reflect the county in any way.
right.
Um, it feels like, it's important progress. I think that you went from, and I kind of love the story of you went from election to protest to civic engagement to pressure and got some change.
Yeah, exactly right. We got
That's
the
how it
change
works.
that we protested about, and
Yeah,
that's important. That and somebody has to be a change agent to make that happen. Because you're not gonna effectuate change sitting on your hands if you see that the system is just the same.
right, right. And I mean, there's still work to be done,
Hmm.
but justice comes in increments. Justice comes, as people are able to get pressure on political leaders in order to do things differently. And good for Larry Hogan,
Hmm.
and responding to that pressure. And hopefully Wes Moore will continue to make some of his appointments that way as well. Hopefully you'll get elected. Hopefully this
Yeah.
pressure will keep growing, and the
Yes.
judiciary will start to feel representative of the county.
Exactly.
You know, um, so I think, and what I guess I would say the other thing I would imagine is, if Anne Arundel County is like any other county in the area, there's a disproportionate amount of people of color going through that court, compared to the number of people in the county. And like, there need to be folks on the court who understand the
Exactly.
experience of Black people, Latino people, Asian folks, and things like that. Otherwise, the justice may not be fair. It may be, whether conscious or unconscious bias, folks aren't getting a fair shake.
Right. Exactly right.
So,
And in fact, in my book, How to Survive Protracted Civil Litigation,
yeah.
in the preface of it, I specifically quote James Baldwin and what he says: if one really wishes to know how justice is administered in a country, one does not question the policemen, the lawyers, the judges, or the protected members of the middle class. One goes to the unprotected and listens to their testimony.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that having a judge on the bench who quotes James Baldwin, I think is a win, because I don't imagine, maybe there's some other folks on the bench that know James Baldwin, that appreciate the wisdom of that, but having somebody there who centers their justice on that question, is important. It's important to the people who, probably are the most policed, are the most involved in the justice system disproportionately, and probably, if it's anything else like the rest of Maryland, get disproportionate sentences right now.
Yes, the sentencing disparity is a concern because it impacts communities. But the other important aspect of this is the fact that when I go around canvassing to neighborhoods, I go to public housing neighborhoods and I talk to them. And they have their opinion of the legal system and the judicial system, and they will just flat out tell you, that you can't get justice in that court. I'm like, why? Why do you feel that way? And they also have misperceptions that because they might have had a felony conviction that they can't vote. And I said that probably is not the case in Maryland if you're out of jail. because of the Justice, Reinvestment Act, and the fact that people can vote if they're out of prison, with few exceptions. And I also go to the detention centers. If you're just charged with a crime and you haven't been convicted, you're still eligible to vote. So understanding and reaching out to those folks, they have voting rights as well.
Yeah, I had a good conversation with the guy the other day who said, I can't vote because I'm a felon, and I was like, did you buy or sell votes? And he was like, I did not buy or sell votes. And I was like, then you can vote. And he was like, oh, okay, and there was some League of Women Voters folks right there. They were able to register them on the spot.
Marvelous.
But he didn't know. He didn't know. And like it's easy enough, they're not very public about this. They don't hide it, but they don't broadcast it either.
Right, exactly right. So when I meet people, I often tell them as well, you can register to vote at the polls during early voting.
Yeah.
Some people miss that. They think that there's a deadline, and I missed it. In fact, I've been at polls before, and people are not aware that they can register to vote and cast a provisional ballot at the polls. So I said, oh, no, you can vote. You can. Even if you made your mind up at this very minute, you can go to the polls and vote. So don't underestimate that, and when I think of the life and legacy of people like Fannie Lou Hamer, how can you not vote? Those people literally suffered for us to have the right to vote.
Yep.
So, I would be cheating them if I just frivolously threw my right to vote away and disregarded it and chose to sit at home and do nothing and say, it's not going to make a difference. It's not going to change anything. So that's where you have to motivate those individuals to the polls.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like you were out there having the conversations you need to have with the people who are ready to vote and the people who might not be ready to vote, explaining why it's important to have somebody on the bench who has your approach to it. And I appreciate that work, and I think it's really important. And in this election season, I'll say it's really interesting to be out in an election season talking about the races that people don't talk about, because they're so used to being like, yeah, I know I'm voting for this person for president or this person for senate or whatever. They know that stuff, but they aren't oftentimes being approached about judges and ballot questions and these things. And that work of going out and talking to people in communities that might be ignored or underrepresented about the other stuff that's important, I think is so important, because I could see, frankly, why somebody doesn't care about voting for president in Maryland, right? Like, it's so, I'm going to vote for president in Maryland, but I can see if people look and they say, whatever, that result's going to be determined anyway. I don't agree with that, but I can understand where somebody's coming from. And I think the work of reminding folks that the ballot has questions and people on it that are not just the ones on the news is really important.
And unfortunately, because our press often highlights the presidential election and everything that goes with that and everything that's happening on that level, the smaller localized issues tend to get not at much press coverage at all. So I'm grateful for podcasting to that extent, so that, we can explore that opportunity and share. Because you asked me a question earlier about, me as a candidate. And I think that judicial candidates are important to consider because they bring perspective to the court. They bring their knowledge, their experiences, what they have seen in life. And sometimes it might be through their representation of clients. and sometimes it's just on their personal experience. But perspective is very, very important for a judicial candidate to have.
Yeah, and the perspective that a judge has shapes the lives of the people that come in front of that judge.
Right, right.
And so it's like it's important for the candidate to have, and for many people it has the potential to have a real consequence in their life at a very important point, at perhaps the most important point in their life. Like if you're in a courtroom, it's either because you're not usually in a courtroom for fun. You're in a courtroom because either you're charged with something, or you're a victim, or you're in a civil dispute that's really important.
Or
And
you're serving jury trials on
or
a
you're
jury.
serving jury trials, right?
Mhm.
And having judges who have perspective and have a sense, or rooted in community and rooted in justice, I think is important.
It's good to know the community, and it's
Yeah,
good for judges to go out there to um, meet the community and not just be about, being behind the chambers, inside your chambers, and no contact with the community at all.
yep, yep. So I want to go back to your book. You mentioned a book that you wrote, How to Survive Protracted Civil Litigation. Can you tell us a little bit about what the book does, what it's about, and why you wrote it?
Well, I actually was inspired by the legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer, and I really wrote the book, however, because I am aware. Again, as I said before, it's about perspective. I am aware of the fact that for many, many, many litigants, especially in civil cases, and not just in civil, but you can also add this to criminal cases, they cannot afford litigation. They cannot afford. They see the task of a lawsuit being filed against them as insurmountable. They have to go to an attorney. That's their first go-to. And when they go to that attorney, they are they're fearful. They figure they have to pay for excellent representation. They're concerned about getting the right attorney. If the attorney is familiar with that particular circuit court system or district court system, or the system, if you will, and navigating through it, knowing the judge and what the judge will accept in a case when it comes to the demeanor of the judge. All of that is important, but it is really important when you have a system that has shortcomings, and those shortcomings you kind of impose upon the citizens to accept. That's not access to justice. And that is the point in the book. You have to have equal access to justice. But if you give them a system where they have to look at $1 million legal bill to get justice, I don't see how that's justice. And I don't see how you're saying that system works for everybody. If they need a lawyer that's going to take depositions, a lawyer that's going to go through aggressive discovery, a lawyer that's going to respond to motions for summary judgment, a lawyer that's going to respond to motions to dismiss, all of that requires hours and hours of legal fees. And either you can afford it or you can't. And so our attempt to write this guide as a nonfiction is really an opportunity to express the shortcomings in the system. Knowing how judges think. A chapter is written on how judges think. Public awareness campaigns. Understanding the Equal Justice Committee that was formed in 2020 by the Maryland Judiciary. Forming a sentencing subcommittee, and understanding the avenues that people have used in the past when it comes to funding resources, crowdfunding. Some litigants resort to crowdfunding, but even taking on criminal cases, especially like a murder trial. You're talking possibly weeks of litigation. And the average Joe Blow cannot afford legal representation that extends to hundreds of thousands of dollars. The average person, even earning federal minimum wage. Now, Maryland's minimum wage is at $15 an hour, but you can imagine people who have are subject to other minimum wage laws. I don't see how they can afford it. And the legal aid may not be the answer for them if they're the working poor. Legal aid may not be the answer for them if again they're strapped financially with other multiple bills, raising a family, etc. So that's encumbersome.
Yeah, and it's not even just the working poor, the middle class. Anybody who works on a wage or a salary can't afford hundreds of thousands of dollars for litigation, even if it's important. And I think that the focus on civil litigation, I think, is really interesting, because I think that the question is often discussed, like, how does somebody afford criminal defense? And I think I don't think there's a good answer to that. And I've known folks who have been facing relatively stiff charges, who've taken pleas on things they don't think that they did. Sometimes because they think that's the best outcome, but sometimes because they don't want a relative to put the house on the line in order to defend them or something like that.
It's a lot of that. It's a lot of taking plea bargains, even though you know you didn't do the crime, but you want a lesser sentence, and you want to avoid jail time. It's those particular scenarios that judges have to be mindful of, and it's about perspective. If you see the sentencing disparity, and the majority of, let's say, African American persons are charged disproportionately with cannabis offenses, what is the system doing to correct that, to fix that? Because this all impacts and is related to generational wealth. How can you get a good job with a criminal record? It impacts how well you can do in the workforce and move up the ladder in the workforce, unless you choose a profession in which you're an entrepreneur and you do well at that. So, those dynamics are significantly important. And that's something I believe that a judicial candidate should be aware of, and the judges that you're voting for should be aware of.
And voters should be aware of how the judges they're voting for think about sentencing disparity, think about unequal justice, right? Like, I mean, voters should understand that there's real consequences to these judicial elections, and should be able and used to asking, you're running for judge, how do you feel about X, Y, and Z?
Well, sometimes there are limitations judicial candidates have. We can't necessarily speak to, for example, saying we're going to rule a certain way in a particular case.
Sure.
So we have those limitations, but it is important to know a little bit about the background of the judge. A lot of times there's not transparency in how these candidates, the judicial candidates, have tried cases and their records, in terms of handling criminal cases, civil cases, family law cases, etc. And you have sources like the robingroom.com that gives you some idea, but that's if people are aware of that website, are aware of the fact that judges are given grades or rated at that particular website, and they might tell you a little bit about the background of going before that particular judge. but it is important for people to know and understand the judicial system. A lot of people assume, well, gee, I hope I never go before a judge, because oftentimes when you meet the community, they often see judges as, or the court system as criminal only, and it's just not.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's an interesting thing where oftentimes the people and the communities that know judges most are the ones that are the most policed, the most sentenced, the most charged, and the most convicted, right? Like I don't know the names of most of the judges in Baltimore because I don't have any interaction with most of the judges in Baltimore. But I remember having a conversation during the 2016 election about judges while I was working for a Green mayoral candidate. And it was a guy from West Baltimore who was saying, oh, our community knows who the judges are. Our community knows who the judges are because our friends are being charged, our family members are being charged and are going in front of folks. And I think that perspective doesn't get shared out very much at all. None of the media is interested in that. None of the people who host forums and debates are asking people who are regularly interacting with the court system what they think about judges, and are asking the communities that have the most people entangled with the justice system about it. And I think having a judge who is rooted in community and out and visiting and making connections outside of the courtroom, outside of the time when there's a case in front of them, is an essential thing for us to do, not just to create confidence in the judicial system, but to understand the perspective of the judge and understand the perspective of the people that are coming before the judge. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. And I encourage voters to, examine candidates from that perspective, that, that is different. And you have a unique opportunity, actually. When you have more than one person on the ballot to vote, you have choices. Yeah. And that, to me, is significant in and of itself, and people should take advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that this time around is you are accessing the ballot via the nomination of the Green Party instead of via the primary process. So you have an opportunity to add another person to the ballot beyond the number that are added on there. Let me ask, what attracted you to the Green Party?
Well, actually, I had been studying the Green Party for a few years now, since about 2020 or so. And I was observing from afar. I may have attended a meeting or two, but then when I joined the Green Party, I became very attracted to some of the initiatives that were part of that party. For example, an initiative with the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, and also an initiative with the Bethesda African American Cemetery Group, which won a very important victory in the Supreme Court of Maryland in involving the desecration of slave cemeteries. So that just opened my eyes in terms of, wait a minute, they're going far beyond what I've seen a principal party do in these particular initiatives. So that kind of, inspired me to continue learning more about the party, the process, and the ability to move forward as a candidate.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because the two coalition partners that the Maryland Green Party has, or the two coalitions that the Maryland Green Party is part of, are the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition and the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. And these are, just like the work that you've been doing, deeply rooted in community and deeply committed to a sense of justice. And I appreciate both of them so much for asking for more than what the principal party politicians are willing to give. And I think they know that their causes are righteous. They know that their causes are just, and they know that their causes serve the communities that they come from and emanate out of. And I think, to me, that's what I love. Like, that inspires me to be excited about politics. When I see those combinations of things, and well, I think that's one of the things that I love so much about your candidacy, is that you have connections to all of these different organizations, both that the Green Party works with, but that we see at a lot of events that are just simply rooted in community in a way that the principal parties are not always.
They're not attached to them, those causes, like the Green Party has been.
Yep. And I think that it's easy to get caught up in the talk about Green Party presidential races and things like that, and that's a conversation for a different time. But on the ground, the Green Party is supporting some of the most important people, and here in Maryland at least, some of the most important people-led, community-anchored initiatives that are all fights that people have said, you can't do this. And Dr. Coleman out of Bio, Samuel Jordan, these folks come from a long tradition of people who refuse to be told they can't do something. And that anchoring in movements of justice and movements of civil rights, I think, gives them an ability to win in ways that the principal parties can't see possible sometimes.
Well, I actually met Samuel Jordan through my relationship with the Caucus of African American Leaders, and he has a tremendous background in transportation and understanding transportation issues and how they impact the community. Very in depth. And I've sat in on some of his presentations, and I've been aware of his coalition for quite a few years. And I am just, very much inspired by the work that coalition does.
Yeah, me too. And I've been working with Samuel and the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition since 2018. When I ran for state delegate in 2018, he really helped us to inform a lot of the policy that we were doing around transit in Baltimore. He helped us to understand the issues, and he helped us understand the history of how transit and civil rights are related to each other, and how mass transit and civil rights are related to each other, as well as how oftentimes the history of highways and individual transportation are working at odds with goals of civil rights and goals of community.
And he knows how to file a Title VI complaint under the Civil Rights Act.
Yep, and he knows how to use the courts. He knows how to use the ballot process. I've really appreciated the opportunity to work with Samuel. I've also really appreciated the opportunity. I was at the Maryland Supreme Court for the Bethesda Africa Cemetery Coalition last year, and I could tell, I'm not a lawyer, but I've watched enough court cases and read enough court judicial decisions to understand that there was a turning point at some point in that case, in that trial, or in that hearing before the state Supreme Court, where I thought the BACC was going to win something out of it. And sure enough, they did, and they got a really good ruling that I think propels the movement forward in Maryland and starts to set precedent around the country for being able to make right what has happened to the cemeteries of enslaved African people.
Establishing precedent.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it was one of those things where it was like, sometimes you can watch the way that lawyers react and understand when they start to realize that they're in trouble. And I remember seeing in the BACC case before the Supreme Court at the beginning of this year, I was like, "Ooh, I think the lawyers from Montgomery County understand that they are starting to be in a little bit of trouble here." Now they're going to keep fighting. They have a lot of resources. They're going to do what they can do. But it was one of those moments where it was like, watching court, watching judicial proceedings oftentimes isn't that exciting, but sometimes you can see the real moments where something begins to shift, and that was one of those.
Wonderful.
You know?
Yes.
So we're getting close to an hour, but there's a couple of other questions I want to ask here. And we've touched on it some, but your website says that one of the reasons that you're running is to keep fairness and impartiality in the circuit court bench. Can you explain a little more about that?
Well, it's the bedrock of the judicial system. There has got to be fairness and equity, and there has to be an appreciation for fairness and equity. And it can't just be words on a paper. As I've often mentioned, the Declaration of Independence, when you say all men are created equal, that cannot just be words on paper. You have got to have an awareness that the laws apply to everyone the same. And, that can't be something that, oh, yeah, we said that, on a website, but do you really mean it? Do you really mean that every person that comes before you is going to be treated at the same level? Are you going to be an active listener, or are you going to be dismissive of a defendant because they're charged with a specific crime? You have to be an active listener.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good perspective on it. And I think it's just a reminder that sometimes the people on the bench feel that way, and sometimes the people on the bench feel a different way. And you have over a decade of judicial experience that you would bring to the position.
Yes.
How does that compare to the other people who are seeking this judgeship?
Well, by distinction, I am the only candidate in this race with over 35 years of legal experience. And 10 years of that 35 years was actually adjudicating cases as a judge. And I authored over 5,000 decisions. And in the DC Administrative Law Judiciary, I received performance evaluations, unlike other judges that come to the bench and serve on the bench. And I received top performance evaluations as a judge. So I've been vetted through that system. So I feel that I, in addition to having a laser focused concern about equity and fairness, I also come with a background as a judge, and I also come with the fact that I've had years of experience, authored over 5,000 decisions, and I come with that common sense, concern, and approach that is important in making, when you're going to the ballot box, making that choice.
Excellent. Yeah. And I think that, early voting starts this week. Election day is in a little over like 20 days or less than that at some
Early
point.
voting, Thursday, October 24 through Thursday, October 31. Polls open 7 a.m., close at 8 p.m. Then November 5 is the last day. Polls open 7 a.m. and close again at 8 p.m.
And Claudia, how do people learn more about your campaign if they want to get involved, if they want to learn about you, if they want to reach out and donate or volunteer?
Thank you. Our website is www.barber, BARBER, the number 4, judge.net. So the website is barber4judge.net.
Excellent. And we will make sure that goes in the notes for the show. And there it is. It just showed up on the bottom there.
Thank you.
And so we'll make sure that is out there. Like we said, early voting starts less than a week away. How are you feeling about this campaign as you come down the home stretch?
Well, I'm thrilled about it. I'm happy I made the decision that I did to go this route. It's an unconventional route, but I'm on the general election ballot, and I'm happy that the Green Party advanced my nomination forward in that capacity. So the campaign trail has been exciting, and I'm looking forward to meeting more voters.
Excellent. Well, I hope the voters find you this week, get to hear your message, and decide that they're voting for you. We need you on the bench in Anne Arundel County, and we need folks. We need folks to know that it's possible for somebody with experience and a rooting in the community and a commitment to justice to win, get on the bench, and to do this important job in the best way possible. Claudia, before we go, is there anything you want to leave folks with? Any final thoughts, either big picture or real small, whatever you want to say?
Well, I think I've said a lot during this entire time period, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share with your audience about the process, about the judicial system, and to share about my writings as well. So, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Claudia. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation. I'm excited that we got to have it. And I hope everybody in Anne Arundel County will make sure that they look at the circuit court judge spot, vote for Claudia Barber, check out her website at barber4judge.net. And thank you so much. This is great. I appreciate your time. And I wish you the best of luck. All right. Well, thank you. This tonight's show with Claudia Barber is the first time we've talked to a judicial candidate, and I was really excited that she was able to break down a lot of the way that the process works. I'm really excited to be doing this series of shows this season to talk about the type of things that people in the Green Party run for, the reasons they run for them, and the vision they have for once they get in office and serve. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you to Claudia for coming on tonight, and thank you to my wife and producer, Dana Polson, who makes sure that all the images are there, that the graphics are there, that the show works fine, and that we stay on time and don't end up talking for 2 or 3 hours, because this conversation with Claudia is the type of conversation that I could have had for 2 hours, 3 hours. It's so fascinating. But I appreciate having a producer that reminds me that you all aren't trying to tune into a 3-hour show. So thank you to Dana, thank you to Claudia, and thank you to you all for joining us tonight. And we will see you again very soon with some more Green Party candidates who are running in races other than president.